Possibly the biggest personalities on the football field in the modern NFL the past 30 seasons have been the wide receivers. Some are brash, brimming with overconfidence and flashy, and bring a whole new element to the game of football. But it wasn't always such a glamour job. So in this edition, we look at the evolution of the offensive ends into wide receivers, and the story's coming up for you in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with PigskinDispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And we are so glad to have you here once again to talk about some great football history. And what could be better about listening and hearing and talking and reading about the game of football, even in the off season. It's just such an exciting time. And, you know, it's such a complicated game. And we're going to use this series, we're going to try to do it once a week, go into the history of each position of the game of football and try to talk about, you know, how it evolved into what it is today that we know it as and where it began as. But before we get to that, we have a couple of things we want to make sure you mention too. We have an email newsletter that you can get each and every morning in your email inbox, absolutely free, and you'll know exactly what's going on Pigskin Dispatch, the Jersey Dispatch, Sports Jersey Dispatch podcast in a Sports History Network, as well as Orville Mulligan Sports Writer, the great audio drama that's out with that we're a part of. So one way to do it is you go to the show notes of this very podcast you're listening to right now and go to the email subscriber paragraph, click on that, couple pieces of information needed, and voila, tomorrow morning you'll have that email sitting right in your inbox. You can also go to Pigskin Dispatch up at the top banner. There is an email subscriber button there, or you can go to pigskindispatch.com/lowercase I, capital U, capital G. Follow us on Twitter also at Pigskin Dispatch, and Facebook, the Pigskin Dispatch page. And you can always send your feedback, comments, concerns, questions to email us at pigskindispatch@gmail.com. Make sure you do those things, and you'll know exactly what's going on with us here at the Pigskin Dispatch and where we are taking you on the journey of football history. And today, we have an interesting one. As we've talked about in other posts, you know, the game of football evolved from the sports of rugby and soccer in the mid to late 19th century, and with the advancements of rules such as 11 to a side and the line of scrimmage, which was added in the early 1880s at the suggestion of Mr. Walter Camp, the father of modern football, offensive positions really started to emerge, and there was traditionally 7 players assigned to play along the line of scrimmage. That's changed here and there, but that's the rule now, is to have 7 on the line, and it sort of was started off that way. And it's not a mystery that the men at the terminals, the outermost positions of each side of the line of 7 players, were called the ends. You know, when you sit there and you think about it, just like most positions, it's sort of captain obvious. Ends are on the end of the line. Now, these rudimentary position names added another layer to them when they gained the nomenclature of right end and left end, both based upon the very side of the line that they were on from the snapper's perspective. You know, if you're sitting there over the ball, you're getting ready to snap it, the guy that's on the end of the line to your left, he's your left end. The guy on the end of the line on your right, he's your right end. Pretty obvious there. So during the stocking cap era of football in the 1880s, all line positions stood erect, their feet spread apart, and they had clenched fists on their arms extended. The author Timothy P. Brown, in his book, How Football Became Football, 150 Years of the Game's Evolution, points out that innovative coach Pop Warner had his Carlisle lineman of 1899 start from a crouching position in a game against Columbia. Now, Warner believed that since getting in a 3 or 4 point stance aided the track sprinters, in the Olympics and in track and field, Well, there's an advantage of getting a good start by them. It also may help stationary football players do the same thing at the snap of the ball. Instead of the starter's gun doing it, it's the quarterback calling a signal and that ball snapping, and boom, you're off to the races. That's sort of the same concept. That's really where the 3-point and 4-point stances came from. Pop Warner's observation, and really it's true. A great observation, great innovation. But the ends would adopt these same tactics pre-snap as the rest of the linemen. And when the ball was snapped, their main objective in early football was to protect the flanks of the formation from defenders attempting to come from the outside edges. It's the old war strategy, protect the flanks, don't let anybody get around the flanks. Well, that's what the ends' job was. They had to protect those ends and not let anybody get back around their line. These fellows were preferably big and strong enough to hold blocks, and that was their main objective once blocking became legal in the early 20th century. And when the forward pass was adopted as a legal play in 1906, well, things started to change a little bit for the ends. It didn't take long that they became, those two terminal ends became part of the 6 eligible receivers of the 11 offensive players. Yes, and that the rule today sort of still stands true. And the eligible receivers are the 2 terminal ends, guys on the end of the line of the formation, and everybody in the backfield, including the quarterback. He's an eligible receiver. So 1, 2, 3, 4 backs, 2 ends, 6 eligible receivers. Now, by the time that the 1930s rolled around, some teams were experimenting with spreading the field by moving one end far out near the sideline, drawing a defensive man away from the running plays and leaving them more open on passing ones. Now, these split ends became the prototype for what has evolved into being called today the wide receiver. The ends that stayed tight to the tackle on this side are now referred to as the tight end. That's sort of where these, the words wide, because they were wide, tight, because they're tight to the formation. Again, another Captain Obvious moment. Football's a simple game when you really look at it. And I think that the evolution of the end of yesteryear to the wide receivers that we know in today's NFL can really be summed up by 3 great players that played the position, and each opened doors to their peers and to those that came later on, and helped morph the game of football and much of its offensive strategy from the one position, the end, turning into the wide receivers. And it's just fascinating. And I this is my theory on these 3 guys, and you tell me if I'm wrong. Remember, we have that feedback. Email us at pigskinddispatch@gmail.com. Well, the first such player that's responsible for revolutionizing the position has got to be Don Hutson. Hudson played end at the University of Alabama in college and later in the NFL for the Green Bay Packers. He was 6 foot 1 inch tall, and he weighed 183 pounds. And at this time, it was sort of an oddball to have a guy that size out on the football field. He was considered sort of tall and skinny, lanky that you may call him. Now, the question always arose is, what is a guy that skinny going to be able to do to help the offense? Now, surely he can't keep a charging defensive end at bay for very long. Well, what Don Hutson could do was run, and he could run very fast. He was clocked at one point at running the 100-yard dash in 9.71 seconds. That's pretty darn quick. And he could outrun every single defender in the game of football at the time. Nobody could catch him. He led the NFL in receiving in 8 of his 11 seasons and in scoring 5 consecutive years. In fact, twice, in 1941 and 1942, he was named the league's MVP. The other thing he could do was run and set passing routes. Many give Hudson the credit for creating the original route tree we celebrate as a fundamental in today's passing game, because he had 2 or 3, 4 great moves that he could run pretty consistently, and his quarterback for much of that time was Arnie Erber of the Green Bay Packers. Hurley Lambeau was the coach. So the innovations, go to those fellows too, to some of the credit. But Don Hutson was just such a unique player at the time, because nobody was putting a skinny, tall, fast guy out on the field to try to catch passes. This is pre-World War II. You're running the darn ball up the middle between the tackles. and you're grinding out yardage. That's how you win ball games. Strong running game, strong defense. That's the strategy of the day. Passing, that's when you get yourself in trouble. It's a gimmick. Well, so he's the first guy, and simply just didn't do those things back then. And the Green Bay Packers exposed defenses by using the speed, skill, and maneuvering of a little guy, and it worked as eventually everyone copied the format. This really opened up football not just to be a game of big brutes, but also have room for the talented slider-built players as well. And this sort of sets up our next man. The second player at end that made a difference to the position was Baltimore Colts great Raymond Berry. Now, Baltimore chose him as a futures pick in the 20th round of the 1954 NFL Draft because he had only caught 33 passes at Southern Methodist University. Now, the Pro Football Hall of Fame tells us, though, that Berry did not have blazing speed. He honed his craft so that he declared himself that he had 88 different moves to get open that he used. Now, Berry was quite the weapon when paired with Johnny Unitas of the Colts as quarterback. Now, together after Unitas joined the team in 1956, this pair gave the Baltimore Colts one of the best quarterback to wideout tandems of all time. 3 straight times, Raymond led the league in receptions and caught a then record 631 passes for 9,275 yards and 68 touchdowns in his 13-year career. And he wasn't fast like Hudson, but he had sure hands and route discipline that made him stand out, and started those little quick twitch moves that we see so often today. And others tried to practice this too, and the game morphed just a little bit more and started to open up, let these receivers started to become a little bit more popular. Now the third player, and this is no surprise, that really transformed the position of wide receiver is Jerry Rice. Now, number 80 of the San Francisco 49ers. He was a receiver in college at Mississippi Valley State, and he had some tremendous games there. But it was a small school, people in the South, not a whole lot of people looked at it. And an article on biography.com informs the reader that Jerry Rice earned All-America honors and set 18 Division I AA records while at Mississippi Valley State. And the Pro Football Hall of Fame.com states that the San Francisco 49ers drafted Rice in the first round of the 1985 NFL Draft. The website, JerryRiceFootball.com, claims that the prolific receiver holds 36 NFL records, and he wears the rings of 3 Super Bowl championships. And you can read about one of those records in our September 29th football history headlines that we post up there. So remember, we cover football every single day of the year. Jerry was not the fastest receiver on the field, but his work on the practice field was seldom matched by anyone, as well as his great film study. And those combined with his natural athletic abilities translated into a big problem for opposing defenses. One of his biggest attributes was his yards after catch statistics, his yak, as it's often called, where he would often turn a short slant pattern catch into a long touchdown reception. And it wasn't blazing speed. The guy was just a natural runner and graceful and knew where to cut, and just tremendous. He could play a defender's own moves against them. Now, Rice is only one of 3 wideouts to have ever won the prestigious Offensive Player of the Year award in the NFL. And he won it 2 different times, once in 1987, once in 1993. Now, Michael Thomas and Cooper Kupp are the only other 2 that won the Offensive Player of the Year, and they did it much later. But Jerry Rice opened the doors for them. Now, the idea of these speed demons on the outside was so much that the team started to figure out how to get more of them out there at the same time. Running backs started shifting outside to tackles as well, and the birth of the flanker occurred. And it didn't take long for the smart guys on the sidelines to scheme the use of using more wide receivers as flankers instead of using backs out there too, and a slot receiver was born. Football was getting used to 3, 4, and even 5 wide receiver sets, as you see in today's game. And after passing schemes became more complex, coaches were finding it confusing and tiresome to keep up with the whole wide receiver, slot receiver, or wide out call-outs. Coaches had to start labeling receivers that corresponded to the position in the field. and thus the folks of football started using the terminology of the X, Y, and Z receivers as offensive players. And in their simplest form, and of course it gets much more complicated in this, but the Z receivers, well, they line up off of the line of scrimmage. They're in the backfield. X receivers are on the line of scrimmage, and the Y receivers is normally close to the tackle, usually playing as a tight end. Now, bunch formations, trips to a side, and other unbalancing shifts and formations allow coordinators to scheme up things like wide receiver screens, rub routes, and even jet sweeps. And, putting those Z receivers in motion can really play havoc on the defense as they alter the formation first presented. And offensive coordinators are always looking for that magic chess piece move that will gain an advantage for their players over their opponents. And where will the position advance to next? Well, we need to watch these superstars at the position and note how the brainiac play callers and innovators use them to gain the next big thing in advantages for the offensive passing game. And we're excited to do that, and we're excited to have you here once again to hear this great football history. We hope you learned a little bit more, and tell us what you think about our theory on those three great players, Don Hutson, Raymond Berry, and Jerry Rice sort of being the catalyst for evolution, or at least the poster child of evolution for those advances of the wide receiver. And of course, the great brains of like Pop Warner and Amos Alonzo Stagg and Bill Walsh had a lot to do with it too. But these players, that's where the stuff really happens. They have to execute, and these three guys really executed at a high level. So hope you'll join us again tomorrow, where we have some more great football history, and each and every day here on Pigskin Dispatch. Till tomorrow, everybody, have a great gridiron day. That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our broadcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.